Hi everyone, welcome to the second seminar in the Winter in the Refuges seminar. My name is Katarina Ramos. I'm going to be facilitating the seminar today. And today we'll be talking about Mattamuskeet National Wildlife Refuge that will be hosted and presented by Kendall Smith, the Refuge Manager for Mattamuskeet National Wildlife Refuge. He's going to be talking to us today about the history of Mattamuskeet National Wildlife Refuge and what you can do during this time period on the refuge. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Kendall.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with everyone tonight, and I'm going to jump right in. Just let me make sure you're still working here. Okay. Yes, Mattamuskeet National Wildlife Refuge. Just a quick introduction to myself. I've been with the Fish and Wildlife Service for close to 25 years, and I've worked in several capacities. I moved into this position about a year ago, a little less, so it's still somewhat new. But one of the things that I've learned and come to appreciate is that just about everywhere I go, anyone I talk to, they know where Mattamuskeet is. They've had many of them, some enjoyable experience at Mattamuskeet. So it's a well-loved place, and it's a place that I have enjoyed working at and serving you all by taking care of some of our public lands. So I'm gonna run through it. It's probably going to be more talking than I enjoy doing, but I'll try to hang in there and be happy to answer questions as we get to the end. You can see from the screen, you know, what Mattamuskeet is all about, or mostly about, migratory waterfowl. And each National Wildlife Refuge across the country has its own unique mission. Many of them were established at a time when migratory waterfowl, particularly migratory birds in general, were the focus, and Mattamuskeet is no different, and it definitely still lives up to its name, in spite of some challenges, which we'll talk briefly about tonight. The refuge purpose, again, is protect and conserve migratory birds and other wildlife through the protection of wetlands, and the refuge primarily is made up of wetlands. And just to get everyone oriented, I know I appreciate having a map early on, so here it is. And Kat, just to verify, can you see my cursor on the screen?
Yes, that's a yes.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
So bottom left, the state of North Carolina, you can see Mattamuskeet is located on the Albemarle-Pamlico Peninsula near the Pamlico Sound. A few of the towns that they're small, but you may have heard of them. Englehart, Suwannee Quarter is in this general area. Fairfield's at the north of the lake. Columbia is about 30 minutes to the north, and we're about an hour from Manio, Nags Head area. So just real quick before I move on, while I'm on this map, just want to point out a few things as I talk. You may hear me talk about some of the moist soil units or impoundments, managed wetlands. Those are located along the periphery of the lake, and that's what some of these red and yellow lines denote. The office area is located sort of center bottom of the lake, where our office visitor center is, and where a lot of the activity occurs. The orange boundary around the lake itself is the refuge boundary, so you can kind of get an idea of what it encompasses. Some forest land, even that is generally wet forest land, wetland. And but of course the lake is, you know, front and center. It is 40,000 acres of open water, and a very shallow lake, about 18 miles wide, 7 miles north to south. So it is an expansive lake, and sort of hard to grasp until you drive across it or see it from a distance, or from up close. I mean, I wanted to start with a little bit of history. I hope that's interesting enough, but there is a very storied history to Mattamuskeet, and so I think it's always helpful to hear and know sort of where things came from, how things started. Not going to go back quite as far as this picture shows, but just to mention that the fish and wildlife resources of this region and this lake particularly have always been abundant and notable. And there on the timeline, you can see the late 1800s, 1900s interest evolved to drain the lake for agricultural purposes. And I'm going to ruin the story here with that last bullet, but those efforts did not succeed in large part. So it did become, it was acquired by the government in 1934, and that's when the refuge was established. But I want to back up a little bit to the history of draining the lake. In early 1900s, the State Literary Board, or Board of Education, as it would be called today, owned the lake and came up with a plan to develop it for agriculture, sell it to basically fund the state's education system. In doing so, the Mattamuskeet Drainage District was formed in 1909 to do just that, to drain the lake and make it farmable. Some private interest took note of the efforts and actually made an offer to the state to purchase that land and continue the efforts to drain it, and that's what happened. Those business ventures began to implement those plans. And this map shows generally how that was going to, or how that did take place. A canal had already been dug in the 1800s, known as Lake Landing Canal, which is where my cursor is here, which actually shrank the lake from its original size, which I've heard is in twice as big as it is now. So that existed already. So there was already some drainage of the lake, and some of the peripheral properties were being farmed already. And but the plan in the early 1900s was to dig what we know as Outfall Canal, which comes from the Pamlico Sound, just outside the view here on the map. A 7-mile canal that would lead to a the world's largest at the time, pumping station, right at the end of Outfall Canal. And from there, a network of canals, 2 main canals going off in different directions, with several feeder canals that covered the extent of the lake, were all designed to drain water to this pumping plant to be pumped out to the Pamlico Sound. And in a lot of ways, those efforts were successful for a time. The canals were dug, pumping plant was constructed, and on several different occasions, and actually the ownership changed 3 different times, and the lake was drained and farmed, although challenges were met several along the way. The town of New Holland was what it was called, and several of the corporations had that name in them as well. And that comes from an area in Holland where this same sort of project had been done, and it actually still exists today and functions. And so, as you can see from some of the pictures, there were some interesting accomplishments during this time. The agricultural crops were quite productive, healthy, good crops, and that's why it was done, because the soils underneath the lake were known to be fertile and excellent for growing. So some other infrastructure was constructed there as well, including the hotel you see in the picture, which drew guests for various purposes, but hunting was one of the notable purposes back in that time period, and still is. But the next picture just shows the pumping plant, and a lot of people ask about the lighthouse that you see in the picture that is more current in the top of the picture here. But as you can see from the more historic picture, that wasn't a lighthouse, that was the smokestack for the lodge with its massive pumps. 1.2 million gallons per minute, I think, was the was the rate. It was a very high rate and a very massive pumping plant. And actually, there was more than just a plant intended. The pumping station is right here where my cursor is in the picture. And as you can see, there was a plan for the town of New Holland, designed again similar to the area in Holland. With I think it's, if you look up Harlem Lake, and that may be not how you pronounce it, but that's the area you'll find that exists today, that's under pumped, and it is a town. But ours never turned out that way. In fact, the next screenshot will show you what is currently in the same footprint, which is much different than what was imagined at that time. You can still see the lodge pumping plant as it were in that day, and then that town was designed to be all right here. In fact, the hotel was built right in this area, and you can see now it's a area of forested wetland. We actually have a trail coming through here, the New Holland Trail boardwalk that you can walk, but I walked it the other day hoping to see some remnants of something out there, but I could not find anything. There may be some others who know the history better and where things might be found, although the water is high now, so some things may be underwater. Mattamuskeet was always known for its fish and game, and attracted visitors from years back, and so it was eyed by the Fish and Wildlife Service, or our predecessor agency. And indeed, when the efforts to drain the lake failed and the business ventures could not be profitable, that's what happened. And the Fish and Wildlife Service purchased the land and established Mattamuskeet Migratory Bird Refuge at the time, which later became National Wildlife Refuge. And so several things began to happen, and the area was managed for waterfowl primarily, and also other wildlife. Some water control structures were installed, dikes, which are the sort of the perimeter of an impoundment, a dam, if you will, were created, and pumping stations installed to manage those areas. And Mattamuskeet became what we know today. A place where you can see abundant wildlife, healthy populations of migratory waterfowl, and it is indeed very important to migratory waterfowl. It's situated along the Atlantic Flyway, which is illustrated here in this graphic, in a very important part, and it serves a very important role for several species. As you can see from this picture, some species in particular, most of their, or a large part of their populations within the Atlantic Flyway winter at Mattamuskeet, notably tundra swans, who have historically used the refuge extensively, have spread out a bit in eastern North Carolina, but still can be seen regularly at Mattamuskeet. But we're not all just about waterfowl. Of course, there are other benefactors to the management that occurs at the refuge, including a variety of shorebirds, wading birds, and we'll see some more pictures of the wildlife soon in later slides. But I want to touch on our management that we do currently, and how that is carried out. So some of the impoundments that you saw on the map I showed earlier are our most highly managed areas within the refuge. The lake itself has historically provided very good habitat for swans and geese and ducks. It's struggling right now with its habitat value for waterfowl, what we'll get into, but the impoundments around the lake still continue to be managed and provide a lot of the food and sheltering needs for many of the species that we focus on. The picture here it shows you a pumping station, and it basically shows you the components of an impoundment. The dike being the land that you see that you could drive on. a pumping plant which can move water into or out of the impoundment, and the impoundment is this area in the background. And in the wintertime, this is what we typically see in those areas. Grass that has grown up through the summer and spring and summer growing season. It has water on it, and it provides a lot of food value and safe space for the waterfowl that use it. But in the spring and summer, it looks a lot different. And in a lot of cases anyway, we manage those areas in a method called moist soil management, which essentially is drawing the water down in the springtime, allowing native plants, hopefully, sometimes we have challenges with some exotic plants, which are Phragmites being number one, which you can see at the bottom of the screen growing pretty well. But we manage them for native plants that grow in moist conditions. And those plants typically provide a lot of seeds and food value for waterfowl, in addition to the structure that invertebrates need. So you also have lots of bugs and things crawling around in there that waterfowl will feed on, especially as they move into the late winter and spring time period. And again, once it's flooded, that's what it looks like, and it provides the shallow water that waterfowl are looking for. Another management infrastructure on the refuge itself are 4 tide gates. And I don't know if you remember the map, but there are 4 main outlet canals leaving the refuge now. So Lake Landing was dug in the 1800s that originally drained the lake through gravity flow. Outfall Canal was constructed for the purpose of pumping the lake dry in the early 1900s. And then 2 more, Walpoppin and Rose Bay canals, were added after the refuge was acquired. But each of those canals have a structure similar to the one you see in the picture that we refer to as a tide gate. And it prevents what allows the lake to drain and then prevents salt water from the sound from going back into the lake. So a little up close shot of those gates show you how one of them is manually open there, closest to that truck. But the foreground in the picture is the sound side, and the background is the lake side. So water can drain out of the lake, but is prevented from moving back into the lake, except under certain exceptions. But in general, that's how those gates operate. There are some fish passage functions that have been added to some of these tide gates that are actually more current than what you see here. Some side opening gates that open more routinely and allow fish to swim from the sound into the lake. But the idea here is that it prevents higher salinities from reaching the lake itself. And over the years, what Lake Mattamuskeet, the lake itself, has been known for is a healthy, productive population of submerged aquatic vegetation. And you may hear me say SAV, which is short for submerged aquatic vegetation. But there are a variety of species, all of which are favored by waterfowl, both for the plant itself, some of the plant parts, as well as the insect population that can inhabit it, and not to mention fish and other things that many other birds will feed on at times. And so we became very used to year after year submerged aquatic vegetation in the lake that grew pretty much with little management and not much attention by us. There was always years where there were often we noticed that 2 different sections of the lake, the west side and the east side, separated by the what we call the causeway or Highway 94 that bisects the lake, behaved a little differently. There would be less submerged aquatic vegetation on the west side, but then over the years we began noticing a decline in SAV overall. And you can see from this next graphic that that by 2015 we had lost a significant portion of the SAV in the lake. And it's not updated on this slide, but by 2017, we had lost all submerged aquatic vegetation within the lake, and that continues to be the status of the lake today. So it has become what used to be a very valuable resource and an area where you would see lots of waterfowl utilizing the lake for food value has turned into a different situation where it's much more where it's less common to see waterfowl using the lake. A lot of times they will be sitting on it, but there are no or very little food value in the lake now. And what's happened is excess nutrients in the lake have caused algal blooms, and also sedimentation in the lake has reduced the clarity, which has affected the SAV community. It's sort of a cyclical problem, and there are multiple factors involved. But in essence, the high nutrient levels have set off the algal blooms, converted it to a more algal-dominated water body, and resulted in some significant problems for us moving forward. Sedimentation is also a concern. Pumping into the lake occurs. When the lake was established, the old Mattamuskeet Drainage District, which included surrounding lands, drained to the lake, and that was part of the establishing agreement, is that those lands would continue to be able to drain to the lake. And that has happened over the years, and you can see from the photo there that sometimes that brings with it sediment, nutrients, lots of things that aren't ideal for the health of the lake. One other issue that we've faced is that, back to this picture, the foreground is the canal side or the sound side, and the background on the other side of the structure is the lake side. The lake over the years has been able to flush more routinely than it has in the past decade or so, and higher water levels in the sound have reduced the frequency of these gates opening and allowing the water to drain from the lake. And high water levels in general, lots of rain have maintained just a high water level situation, and the inability of the lake to flush regularly. So there's several problems going on there. Thankfully, we do have a good stakeholder group, partnership of multiple entities involved. It has been for about 10 years, and a lot of research has been done. Carp is another complicating factor, another reason the water is cloudy and the light penetration is such a challenge for the vegetation. We do have plans to remove a significant portion of the carp that are in the lake. We have some funding secured and a good plan in place that will occur in the next 2 to 3 years to remove the carp, and so that is a major project coming up for us. And then hopefully, in working with our partners, we'll devise some ways to reduce the nutrient inputs into the lake and to improve our ability to move some of the lake water in different directions to better regulate and hopefully improve the water quality, in addition to improving some of the water quantity concerns of our neighbors who often experience flooding in their yards and on their property. But that's enough doom and gloom. I'd like to get back to the thing we love about Mattamuskeet, and that's the wildlife that we often see. So I just want to go through some of the wildlife that you could expect to see on a visit to Mattamuskeet. Bird life is, of course, very abundant, and some of the most prominent species throughout the year are what we call the long-legged waders, the white egrets or great egrets, and the great blue heron are very commonly observed on the refuge. Cormorants, ibis, both glossy ibis, which are shown in the bottom right, and white ibis that have the same shape but are white with some black patches on their wings. Terns, osprey frequent the terns would be the one of the, you are wildlife folks, you know, but the top right, top left, and then osprey that are often build nests in some of the cypress trees that are in the lake, most of which are a factor of the canals that were dug years ago and the spoil piles, and that's where those cypress have established. Of course, the swans are a notable species and very easily observed most of the winter months. But you've seen lots of pictures of those already, so I want to highlight a few of the other species that are present in and around the refuge, and that's some of our reptile and amphibians. Alligators we see occasionally, and then of course we have an abundant turtle population with numerous species, as well as our snake population. So keep an eye out for those as you're on the boardwalks and things. And of course the typical mammals of the eastern North Carolina, including some of our not so welcome friends, the nutria, an invasive exotic who can do some damage to our roads and dikes. And otters too. I don't have a picture of them on here, but otters are fairly commonly seen throughout the refuge and are fun to watch. So as I talk about some of the opportunities for visitation, I wanted to go back to this map just to highlight a few things. I did realize about 30 minutes ago that this map was a little outdated, but I think we can use it for our purposes. Most of the lake itself is, well, all of the lake itself is closed to boat traffic from November through February. And then some of the areas, those shown in red on the lake, are also closed and treated more as a refuge area to limit disturbance to the waterfowl. We have high populations of waterfowl that use the east end of the lake here, so we keep those areas closed to most disturbance during those times. And similar situation on the west end, although you can walk in the road that's colored yellow there. Most of our public use during the wintertime occurs right around the office area. What we refer to as the entrance road impoundment is this triangular shaped area here that intersects with Highway 94. And you can drive all the way around that impoundment and provides really good viewing opportunities for waterfowl and quite high numbers of waterfowl as well. Another area is East Main Road, which extends to the east from our office area. And then at the end of it, an area we call Fisher Slough is often a lesser known spot to go to, and you usually often find yourself alone there, so kind of a neat spot to visit. And also this time of year is the Sandy Dike Road and Moist Soil Impoundment or Marsh Impoundment 3. Those areas are open, and you can hike or walk or bike those areas as well. And of course, Highway 94 offers several viewing opportunities. Our main observation platform is located there, as well as several pull-offs and places where you can walk. We have mainly one trail available, which is near the office, the New Holland Boardwalk, and I'll show a picture of it in a moment. But just to get you oriented with the map, it's located here. And unfortunately, since the start of COVID about a year ago, our visitor center has been closed, as have almost all wildlife refuges. And so no idea when that will be open back up, but the refuge itself is open just as it always is. So we encourage you to come visit. Some of the primary public use opportunities that occur throughout the year are, of course, fishing, and bass, perch, crappie, catfish, lots of different species can be caught and enjoyed both from a boat and plenty of bank fishing opportunities as well. Crabbing has been a favorite pastime over the years. The crabs used to be very abundant and large, and they still exist, and people still do crab. The population seems to have dwindled, and I hear the size is often not quite as impressive as it used to be, but that still happens quite a bit. Of course, fishing is one of probably the most popular thing done there, fishing and crabbing. And there's several areas where you can access the water, along with several areas along Highway 94 that you can just pull off to the side, or each of the 5 culverts that are along that road that allow water to flow from the east side to the west side of the lake are some of the most popular spots to fish. Wildlife observation and photography has become very popular, especially in the wintertime, especially right now, because of the abundant waterfowl that are on the refuge. And we have several spots, again, most all of which are located near the office area, to view those waterfowl. Here's a shot of the observation platform on the Highway 94 causeway that bisects the lake itself. And then here's the shot of New Highland Trail Boardwalk that's just north of the office area. It's a very short trail, but it's enjoyable to walk, and again, not frequently quite as much as the areas that you can drive. And I know that was quick, but I figure I'll let y'all ask the questions, and I can be more helpful that way. So, Kat, I guess I'll turn it back to you for facilitating that.
Okay. Well, we did have a question in the chat, so let me go ahead and get to the chat. So Stephen asked, what is the optimal time of year to visit for the waterfowl on Mattamuskeet?
Yeah, probably anytime from November through March. The most abundant populations would be December, January, February. And then as things start moving back north, the numbers may change at times, but anytime November to March is a sure bet to see some large numbers of waterfowl.
And if there's more questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Kendall, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Do you know which observational platform would be the best for viewing the waterfowl?
Yeah, let me go back to the map if I can. So the main observation platform that was in that one of those last pictures is here on Highway 94, and it's very scenic. But in terms of viewing waterfowl, probably the 2 best places to do it. There is another observation platform that's not shown on this map along the entrance road impoundment where you can stop, but you can see a lot of waterfowl just driving along. But that observation platform is probably where you'll see the most activity, and if you can be there early or late in the day, it can be very impressive. Fisher Slough, there's another wildlife observation at the end of this road where my cursor is. You probably won't see as large numbers of waterfowl, but it's a little bit different environment. So those 2 spots is where I would go to: Entrance Road Impoundment and then Fisher Slough.
Awesome, thank you. And Karen, you had your hand raised. You can go ahead and ask your question if you'd like.
Are there places to stay down there that we could stay overnight?
Sure, yeah, and if you will go on our website, and or I'll provide my email address here, we can send you a sheet with several options for that. Of course, the internet's a good source too. There are a few bed and breakfast around. There's a hotel in Fairfield, one in Englehard, and probably some Airbnb type things around as well that I'm less familiar with. There's the Mattamuskeet Outpost, I think it's the name, hotel real near the office that caters mostly to hunting and fishing parties. I'm not sure if they, but you know, it's worth a call to them. But all those would be on that list I would send you, and you could follow up that way.
Okay.
One day we hope to have the lodge back in order for lodging and visitation. We actually that was transferred to the state about 15 years ago, and it is a very expensive project to get that lodge back in order that it can be used by the public. But second to restoring the lake is restoring the lodge. So we hope we can accomplish both in the future.
Okay. And then Kirby, if you'd like to ask your question.
Yes. First of all, is it best to consider Mattamuskeet Lake as an inlet lake, or is it an inlet sea? How brackish is it? Is it mostly fresh water? And the second follow-up question is my understanding of the algae bloom problem, this is more of a water problem, maybe a climate problem, but certainly a water problem rather than a pollution problem.
So the saltiness of the water, those 4 canals, and you can see all 4 of them on this map here, are the only outside connection from the lake to the sound. And so the effectiveness of those tide gates on those canals is what regulates interchange between the canal or the sound and the lake. Over the years, you know, that has worked more efficiently and less efficiently. So historically, the lake has seen more variation in salinities than it currently does. It's never been a high salinity lake. It's, you know, 5-6 parts per thousand, probably at the most in the lake itself. But since the newer gates were installed, they are pretty good at doing what they were designed to do, and essentially that's keep the salt water out. And that maybe it's good or bad depending on who you're talking to. For the farming interest, you know, they're very sensitive to that salt water and can't tolerate more than about 1 parts per thousand on their field. So, so there's some negative issues associated with that. But those gates have kept the salt water out for probably about the past half dozen, 10 years, down to what it is currently is about 0.2 parts per thousand. So it is by and large a freshwater lake at this point. The question on the algae, so high nutrient levels can jumpstart that process. And I'm not the expert. I often rely on our biologists and others who are more in who know more of the details of the biology of the lake and the history of how that's changed. But the nutrients are what's caused the algal bloom. You asked another question. What was the other part of your question, Kirby?
Yes, I had to find my mute button. Now I'm set. The other part was, is the algae bloom problem one of nutrients governed by simply all the wet weather or some climate problem, or is it a pollution problem? You know, at least 20 years ago, we used to hear, anytime we heard algae bloom, we would think, well, that has to do with pollution and phosphates from detergents that we put into the waters and that type of thing.
Right. So yeah, that's not an uncommon problem in lakes around the nation. Nitrification or nutrification, excuse me. In this case, you know, the sources of nitrogen, the sources of phosphorus would be likely agricultural related, related to some of the impoundments around the refuge that have nutrient inputs. And then, whether those inputs are from fertilizer or whether they are, through the seed of a plant into a duck and then fertilizer from the duck itself. There's some contributing factors, but some of the changes that we've seen over the past 30 years are an abundance of other waterfowl impoundments outside of the refuge that drain into the refuge that are typically producing crops of corn, which are high nutrient crops. And most of those impoundments, in order to do that, have to be drained in the spring of the year, and they drain to the lake or pumped to the lake. And so, we do see spikes of nutrients in the February-March timeframe, which would correspond to draining of those areas. Some research was done in the past year or two to compare, refuge impoundments to an offsite agricultural field, and discovered nutrient levels coming from both. But in the unlikely event that those fertilizers are applied on those ag fields and are not taken up by the plant before a hard rain comes, a lot of that runoff can carry those nutrients to the lake, and so we don't have all the answers yet, but we sort of have a pretty good idea of what the general sources are. I think the challenge is trying to change the way we do things to reduce those nutrients, or possibly sending them to some sort of treatment wetland or some other area other than the lake. Related to your question about climate, higher sea levels reduce the ability of the lake to drain. So even though we don't want to send high nutrient water anywhere, the lake's ability to flush in the past has done so more readily than it does now. And part of that reason is because the sound waters are higher on average over the past decade than we experienced before that. So flushing does not occur on a routine basis now.
Thank you.
Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and move to some of the chat questions. We got a whole bunch to get thrown in. Right. So Richard and Sue are asking, how has the reduction in SAV affected waterfowl populations?
We haven't noticed a drastic decline in the overall numbers, which fluctuated year to year prior to SAV decline too. But so it's difficult to draw exact correlation. We have seen swan populations or groups of swans sort of redistribute themselves and across eastern North Carolina. So whether we can attribute that to the lake itself, it's not the only place swans came to anyway, but we certainly see fewer here now than before. That's highly possible. I think there's also a factor of there's more habitat on private lands around the lake. The hunting interest and wildlife enthusiast interest around the lake, have created good habitat for waterfowl, and so we see them using those areas perhaps a lot more than before. And they do come back to the lake, to rest and sit there through the day, but the food value is greatly declined there. So, but generally, you'll still see plenty of waterfowl on the refuge, just not so much on the lake.
Okay, and one more from the chat. Do you ever allow walking photographic access to the more restricted impoundments on the refuge?
No, those areas are closed from November to February, through February. But that did remind me, I forgot to mention a couple of photo blinds on the refuge. Probably the best photo blind is just off Highway 94 on this entrance road impoundment. You can see it easily from the road itself. And we do have another one out out Central Canal Road, but it doesn't get as much use. I don't think the location is, especially with fewer numbers of waterfowl in the lake. It's not quite as good as the one on Highway 94. But the waterfowl on the entrance road impoundment are sort of habituated to vehicles and people. So you can, just my personal experience, I know from other parts of the refuge, you can't get anywhere close to waterfowl, and some of the areas closed to public use, but on the entrance road impoundment, you can get quite close, and even with a camera like mine, you can take a decent picture.
Awesome. And then Rob, it looks like you have your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Yes. I gather that the lake is pretty shallow in general, and I wondered if you would discuss boating access and the limitations on the size of your boat or your motor horsepower. What size of boat can you actually use there? Is there a place to put it in and out?
Right. Yeah, and you see a couple boat ramps here on the map. And yes, the lake is a very shallow lake. Probably the deepest spots are about 6 feet in the western section of the lake. But in general, we're depending on water levels, we're talking more of a 2-foot depth. A lot of the fishing occurs in the canals that you can see in the blue and white on the map, which are deeper in general. They're not deep, but they are deeper than much of the lake. So a lot of the fishing occurs there, and then around the edges of the lake. And there are, there's a boat ramp on Central Canal, and then one on the Rose Bay Canal. And then there's also another one close to the office as well that you can access east and west main canals, which are these, the sort of oriented in a V shape near the office. But as far as boat size, usually aluminum boats, a John boat of varying sizes is used. Smaller fiberglass boats can be used, but anything shallow draft is important.
Awesome. And Patty, it looks like you also have a question?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Since the waterfowl seem to be there more during the winter months, would spring and summer then be more likely for fishing, or are there something other to see during those months?
There's almost always something to see. The waterfowl are gone in large part. We still have some resident waterfowl in the area, but the large numbers of waterfowl are gone during the spring and summer. The weather, of course, is and the quality of the fishing is what makes spring and summer much more attractive to those interests. But in terms of wildlife, if you spend enough time there, you'll definitely see some things, deer roaming around, plenty of aquatic creatures in the impoundments and ditches and canals. And then, the bird life is still abundant. It's just a different suite of species, from wading birds to shorebirds, wetland, anything wetland related will be there. And then raptors are, also moving through during their migrations. Bald eagles are common, osprey during the summertime. So there's always something to see.
Wow, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then we'll go to Camille. Sorry if I say your name wrong. I'm so sorry. You have your hand raised. Or maybe not. I'll give you another question from chat then. Sorry, my chat disappeared.
I'll follow up on the question about photography and some of the closed areas. So as I mentioned before, even through March, there's a large number of waterfowl present, and these areas open back up in March 1st. So that can offer a good time to visit where you can access more areas.
Hello, this is Camille. I'm unmuted now.
Yep.
When is the lake open to canoers and kayakers, and where are the places to launch?
Okay, yeah, it follows the same rules as any boats. The lake is closed from November 1st to February 28th. So outside of those months, the winter months, canoeing and kayaking is allowed. Any of the boat ramps would work well. You can launch in most other unimproved areas as well. As long as they're not closed to the public. The causeway itself is an option. Lake Landing, which is the area I'm showing on that sort of the eastern end, is the other entrance, public entrance. So you can launch there into some of the canals and access the lake. And so between Lake Landing and just in general around the office area, there will be several unimproved spots, plus the existing boat ramps would make very suitable locations to do so.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And Maria asked within the chat, she asked, is there still a wolf howl trip on Mattamuskeet?
Still a what?
Wolf howling trip?
No, that would be at Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. It's the only opportunity I know of.
And then Richard and Sue have a question about, so over the last 2 decades, why has the National Wildlife Refuge not been more successful in reducing the SIV decline?
I think, well, I don't think it would have prevented it, but I think if we had had some of the monitoring that we currently have in place, we would have certainly been alerted to the problems sooner. We have 2 USGS monitoring stations on the lake now that monitor a variety of parameters, nutrients, salinity, and you can actually pull those up online and see what those conditions are real time. We take routine water monitoring samples on the lake in different locations throughout the year. But there's no easy answer to that, because it is a very complex problem, and it's going to take cooperation from all the stakeholders, the farming community, in particular, I think, those that drain to the lake. I don't know if folks on the call are aware, but there are several drainage districts around the perimeter of the lake on private lands, and Fairfield itself is below sea level and is under pumped drainage. A large area of that part of Hyde County, if those pumps were cut off, houses and farm fields would be underwater. So the water has to go somewhere, and in a lot of cases, it's coming to the lake. The watershed of the lake is about 100,000 acres, and the lake itself is 40,000 acres. So gives you kind of an idea of the area that we're working on. Some of the ideas currently are to try to accomplish some active water management of the lake water level itself through pumping. Some other ideas are to work within the watershed outside of the refuge to try and redirect some of that drainage, along with various improvements to canals, tide gates. A variety of ideas have been put forward and are being evaluated now. There's currently an engineering firm developing a hydrologic model for the lake, so we can better understand how the water moves into and out of the lake, and be able to use that to evaluate many of the ideas that we have on how to make improvements. I think one of the things we really need to work on is how to reduce the nutrient loading in the water that comes into the lake, and that can be done by a variety of best management practices on agricultural lands. Could be done through filtering that water before it reaches the lake, or pumping the water from the lake into some sort of filter before it is delivered to the sound or intercoastal waterway. So there's a lot of folks involved in trying to address that problem, and a lot of ideas on the table that are being evaluated. And that's about the best answer I can provide to that question right now.
Okay. Well, it is just about 7 o'clock. So Kendall, if they would like to ask you more questions about Mattamuskeet National Wildlife Refuge, would they be able to contact you?
Sure. I'll provide my email address, and of course the refuge phone number is on the website. Mm-hmm. But my email is Kendall. You may be able to see it spelled on your screen, but that's KENDALL _Smith at FWS, as in Fish and Wildlife Service, .gov. So Kendall _Smith at FWS.gov.
Okay, I went ahead and I put that in the chat for everyone.
There's a general. Okay, great. Yeah, sorry, I should add that to my slideshow.
No, it's fine. I'll go ahead and also send it out with our email, giving an overview of the seminar. But thank you so much for talking about Mattamuskeet National Wildlife Refuge today. And thank you to everyone else who came and listened in on the call and asked questions. We look forward to hearing from you. And just to let you guys know, we have yet another seminar on the refuges within the area. Next week is on Pea Island National Wildlife Refuge at 6 o'clock. Same old, same old. And we look forward to seeing you there as well if you are interested. And with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening and y'all stay safe, okay?
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.